So we are now recording. So welcome to this data literacy consortium call. This is happening on March 10th. This is our first call in 2020. And one of the things that we thought would be great to be kicking off this year with is a little deeper examination into how we are all adapting existing materials in our data literacy work. One of the things that those of us that are building data literacy resources, one thing we have come to the point of being completely cognizant about is reinventing the wheel. And we certainly do not want to be reinventing the wheel. There's lots of great stuff out there. The main challenge, though, is really knowing about them and understanding them. So one of the purposes of this call is both to do that. How do we adapt existing materials? But then also, what are existing materials that are out there? What are things that we should all be knowing about and using in our work? So that's basically the goal of the call. We're going to start off. We've got a couple of really brief highlights for you and some really great examples of adapting existing materials. So you'll hear roughly four examples about that. And then after that, we're going to throw you into some small breakout groups using the magic of Zoom. And you are going to talk to each other and share with each other your own stories and experiences of adapting existing materials. Once that is done, we're going to come back for a large group discussion with capturing some key takeaways. And probably have some brief discussion on current resources, new resources that you should know about. And then we'll wrap this all up with having a thing on how we can use the consortium to continue to share our stories about how we are adapting our experiences or adapting various materials. So with that, I want to get us started. So we're going to, first up, Bob Gradek from the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center has a quick slide deck he's going to show us about their materials. So Bob, are you ready to go? Yes.
I'm all set. So
Great.
This is a project called Data 101 that we did over the last few years. It's our data literacy series of workshops. And so the project team that developed this was us in our project and also our public library, the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. You can see a picture of Pittsburgh there. But we were starting with data literacy in a very computer lab kind of way, showing people how to use technology, and it didn't work so well. We were fighting technology more than we were using it. People were using different systems, things would break, people would fall behind, get disconnected, disengaged. And so we just really said, let's take a different approach. And what we did is we were inspired by the MIT Center for Civic Media. They had a series of workshops we really liked, and our partners in the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership inspired us as well, and came up with this whole series of paper-based data literacy workshops to try to level the playing field. People that weren't familiar with technology wanted to be able to still participate but not be terrified of it. So we have 4 sets of workshops. So what is data is one, where we explored just general data concepts, things like ethics, metadata. We then moved into charts in a series of workshops around that. And these were really modular things, 15 minutes a workshop or 15 minutes an activity. Covered things like pre-attentive attributes, how to rearrange a chart using felt boards, passing around a data set and asking people in the room to draw this data set differently and create a different data visualization than somebody at the table next to them. We have a series of mapping workshops where we cover things like choropleth maps, basics of GIS like geocoding and spatial analysis. And then we concluded it with a workshop that was really inspired by the MIT work, telling stories in data and finding stories in data. So we just put out real live data sets and just maps and basic things that people could use as part of that workshop activity. And so it went really well. People were engaged. They talked to each other when the computers weren't involved. People that were experts were at the same level as everybody else around the table. So really it was all about the materials, and our participants had a really great experience. It was fun. They were able to talk to each other. They thought about how to talk about data literacy as opposed to just clicking buttons on the computer and making your screen look like somebody else. And we didn't realize this, but at the time, Lisa and Caitlin from the UN found this stuff because we participated in these workshops and put everything in the roll call document. They found our toolkit, and they really talked to us yesterday about how that was so valuable for them. So they included things like an agenda, the slides for the presentation, a facilitator's guide, which had a lot of detail about how to actually replicate this. We did the workshops in several different occasions before we wrote the facilitator's guides, and that's really helped them adapt that and us to put enough detail in there. And then logistics, like we have things in there like, here's some text you can use to promote your workshops as well. I'll post a link to this toolkit in the Google Doc in a second. But we want to do more of this. We want to do more paper-based workshops like spreadsheets, diversity, inclusion, and equity, health data literacy, algorithms. We want to take people from paper to the computer. And then we want to start to think about how do we take this and build a culture of data literacy. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over, and just wanted to give you that perspective on kind of where we were with this workshop. So sound good?
Yeah, super inspiring, Bob. Lisa, do you want to pick it up from here?
Sure. Yeah, so Lisa here from Center for Humanitarian Data. Caitlin and I are the co-leads of the data literacy program there. And just as Bob had said, we found his work through the consortium and were super delighted to find it, and just really admired the approach that they took. And at the time that we found it, we were developing a data literacy training program for humanitarian affairs officers, which are middle managers within UN OCHA, our organization. And we were inspired by what Bob did for a number of reasons, because we also needed to find a starting point for entry points for these humanitarian affairs officers and how to upskill them. We wanted to have a program that was tailored for humanitarian work, and we wanted it to be inspired by the people who would actually use the data in the field, and that it could be these kinds of things could be carried out by them. So we delivered the program in the fall, and will be releasing shortly a series of public modules, very much like what Bob has done in doing this very same thing, providing a starting point tailored for humanitarian work and tailored for people in the field and how they use data. And we wanted to make sure that our program and these modules were something that didn't seem like it was coming down from on high, that it was a training program that was from within, and understanding that our field colleagues are responding to the crises that they're sitting in, and also these flare-ups that are always there. So they're super busy, but training is part and parcel of what they do for technical colleagues. And they're trying to upskill people within their own office and within the operations. And there are opportunities to do it at staff retreats or other points of times where trainings can be provided. However, being able to develop kind of training programs or even short brown bag lunches is hard, and knowing where to start. And it's time intensive to create them. And we found also that even though there are an abundance of Excel courses online, that they're not always tailored or customized for the tasks at hand. And the other thing that inspired us to have these public modules was this scaling, and that if we want to be able to improve data literacy within OCHA and within humanitarian operations, face-to-face trainings aren't going to cut it. There's just not doing it cohort by cohort, 20 people by 20 people. We need to engage field offices to actually upskill their own people. So these public modules, very much in line with what we took from or borrowed from what Bob had did, and we provided a clear starting place for people. And this is what we were really appreciative of Bob's work, is that it started from the basics, so that when you're training non-technical staff, it gives everybody a sound basis to start data work. there was very clear documentation with Bob's work, and we made sure to carry that on as well. It eased the use for navigation and how to tailor and deliver the program. So we found that a best practice and carried that on. And also the encouragement to customize the training, and just laying that out there, that there are many different ways that these trainings could be delivered. At a brown bag lunch, you could do a series of, of a 15-minute or half an hour sessions, and that it was really modularized for us, that you could mix and match the way that you needed. And that while we were providing data for people to work with, that they should understand their audience and the data that they would be working with and the tasks that they would need, and that they could calibrate it based on their audience, who they are, their level of sophistication with working with data. So what we're hoping is that the work we borrowed from Bob and are making public modules, that our colleagues in the field will do the same thing, that they will take these modules and then customize them, and could even make them available at a country level for their counterparts. So all just to say, we stand on the shoulders of giants, all of us.
That is absolutely so true, and I think the bit, that's a great example in terms of the how one project around data literacy then becomes a foundation for another project, and I think that's something that we've over the last decade have been seeing over and over again. For my example that I wanted to show was a very discrete piece of adaptation where so very early on with School of Data, which is they put out curriculum, and I know other people on this call are going to have the dates down better than me, but earlier in the decade, School of Data put out a whole bunch of curriculum for people to be using in data literacy work. One of the things that was really important in that curriculum that they put out was something called the data pipeline. And the data pipeline is just a way for people to get their heads around, what happens with data throughout a project. So from beginning to end. One of the things that I loved about the pipeline was that it started with the thing of ask a question, and then got people to think about these various steps that then followed after you ask the question to the point where you are presenting your data. I am very fond of in doing workshops and getting people to put steps in order. If anybody, I think there's a few people on this call that may have attended a couple of my workshops where I've done this. One of the things I absolutely love about putting steps into order is that it gets people to think about linear and whether or not linear is actually appropriate for what we're talking about. And always, whenever it doesn't matter what the subject is, when I'm working through put the steps in order exercise, people get this sense of like, oh my God, there's cycles here. There are, what I mean? Like, it's not a simple linear step-by-step process. And so then getting people to think about what are other steps that are missing and how do those cycles actually work. So let's start rearranging the steps and putting them in different ways. So if you're on the Google Doc, I've put the example, you'll see on the left, and it's now, I think, I have lost track of my pages, but it is after the roll call, it is probably now page 5 or 6. You'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, the original School of Data pipeline. You'll see on the right side, a recent workshop that I did for UK grant makers and what they did with the pipeline when I asked them to put it in order. So you'll see all the cycles, you'll see all the different things that come into play. I think the big thing is having this outside cycle of the your data workflow, which is around building community, understanding users, and implementing actions, right? And so that's the thing too, in terms of starting off with a concept like the data pipeline. what is missing, what is not there, what are the things that you are actually trying to do to get this all to support. So that comes out very strongly in that thing. So I have included links in below that both how that gets comes into play into larger curriculum, but then also the discrete exercise itself, which is the second one, which is out of the data playbook. And so with that, I'd love to hand this over to Heather, who's going to share her own example, and then after that, we're then going to get into small groups.
Super. Thanks, everybody. And I know it's a lot of talking now, but we were going to have breakout groups shortly. The data literacy program at IFRC started in 2016. One of the first things we did was the data playbook. And now that data playbook was published in 2018, and we did that in partnership with Dirk, with FabWriter. And we also had a number of exercises that we did with the Center for Humanitarian Data. So when we birthed the Data Literacy Consortium, which is all of us now, people on the call, we knew that we wanted to be able to have places where people adapt and share. And so what I really want to reflect just very quickly that the adapting and remixing content is at the heart of what this consortium is. So I'm really thankful to hear those stories. And the second part is that without organizational buy-in to actually get to your audiences, that's a problem without knowing who your audiences are. So last year, instead of going to version 1 with the data playbook, which we wanted to because it's a beta version, we decided to understand our audiences a little bit better. So we did a deep dive on volunteering, we did a deep dive on who our leaders are, and then we also did a deep dive on how do we help the people with Microsoft Excel. And so those are the 3 things that kind of relate to Data Literacy Consortium. When it comes to data to volunteers, please don't tweet it out right now and share it, but I shared a link for an online curriculum that is trying to reach our middle level volunteers. And just to be clear, IFRC has 13.7 million volunteers, and it's every kind of person from the data curious to the data ready, right? So serving those audiences is really rough, but just take a look at it as data literacy practitioners and take a look and give us some feedback, because while we're serving it for our audiences, I think it might serve a larger audience, and we're looking for feedback by the end of March. So always happy to share and collaborate. Once we launch it, we'll definitely share with this group and see how we can potentially partner, because I know other groups are working with volunteers. The data for leaders portion, or the leader decisions research, we really were inspired by the Center for Humanitarian Research that they did, because they were looking at how do they reach their leaders and what kind of training they needed. So we also did, we didn't do a high-end research like they did, but for the last few months, my colleague Gabrielle has been doing something which is based on storytelling, asking people to tell a story, but not telling them about data, asking them to tell a story about when they made a decision. And underneath that, we found all kinds of things about access points, about how people feel about data visualization. What do they think actually informs a decision, which we're going to actually build programming from. And so looking at how other people and other organizations do research, and then how do you activate it to reach your audiences, is something the consortium certainly has gifted us. And so Gabrielle will be sharing, we'll do an online session with that soon, and we'll be sharing some of the research articles and stuff like that in the next little while. And lastly, we're at the end of March, we'll be done a pilot with Microsoft Excel, which had 221 kind of data ready leader people be access to do online training. And this just in, not everybody, and of course, you know, most people don't finish online curriculum courses, especially in the humanitarian space. It's really hard to fit it into your day. And so without actually having organizational buy-in to reach people so they have the time to do that, that's one factor. The second factor is sometimes these courses, while they can be massive, definitely you need to be able to have something that can plug and play. And so the data playbook was built on a plug and play model, whereas the Microsoft Excel thing was very much a curriculum that you kind of have to go through step by steps to go through it. And now we're looking at how do we help people learn Excel, because again, we have to give things that people can kind of plug and play into their day across the world, because we don't want to do workshops for 20 people. We want hundreds of people to have access to that. And, you know, lots of lessons that we need to document. But again, just to say that the kind of top 3 things we have are learning from other organizations is absolutely key, having organizational buy-in, and then thinking about the fact that everybody learns differently. Those have been kind of the 3 things for us. But this year we're going to work on our next version of the data playbook, and hopefully there'll be a heavy section on it on data protection and responsible data use. But definitely we'll check in back with you. But just hand it over to Dirk, and just thanks again for hosting everything, Dirk.
Sure, and thanks for that, Heather, and it's really exciting to hear the plans on the data playbook, but also all the work around data for decision makers and things like that. Super good stuff. Folks, this is the bit we are actually super excited about, because we know that, you know, with this experience that you have just heard, you probably have tons more and probably even better stories in terms of experiences that you've had. So we're going to give you an opportunity to talk to each other. So I'm about to throw you into small breakout groups. Welcome back.
Hello.
I always feel so guilty. Sorry,
I
go
know,
ahead,
like
Heather.
breaking up people's first date. You know, what are we gonna do? You know, they're actually having a good chat. They've made a new data playbook.
Folks, we are so grateful that you have those conversations. Slightly ungrateful in that we don't get to overhear them as they're going on. That's the one downer of the Zoom. Is you know, you can't just hover over people and listen to what they're talking about.
They took great notes, Dirk.
Yeah.
So glad for that. So anybody who's listening remotely later, you can see the notes.
We're so excited about that. So what we'd love to do, we have maybe 13 minutes left in the call, is we'd love to be able to get your takeaways, just the top level ahas that you just had in your discussion. So if anyone wants to start, I'm hoping to at least get 1 or 2 from each of the breakout rooms. So I will start calling them out unless somebody wants to volunteer to go first.
And if you want to help me take takeaway notes at the bottom of the document, I'm always happy for some allies.
Going once. Anybody want to say anything?
Don't make us name check.
Okay, I'll go.
Go,
Hey.
Neil.
Hey, Neil. Thanks for being a super joiner.
Well, believe it or not, I am a newbie to not this conversation, but to this work. And so I had the good fortune of having a few moments where it felt like Liz was the subject expert in the room who just shared with me some links about the kit, talked to me a little bit about how I could kind of launch my journey in terms of sharing that in my new role as kind of operations director and fundraiser for the Foundation for Intentional Community, which is 1,500 communities around the globe. So anyway, a good little initiation for me. And Liz a lot was there contributing and listening, and she also shared the playbook with me, Heather. So I feel like I'm well equipped to continue my journey.
Very good. Good. Another breakout room. See, Sarah, you were with Hannah and Steve. Did you guys have any good takeaways?
Yeah, there were, you know, I think we kind of reiterated some of the resources that already have been mentioned. But one kind of aha, at least for me personally, that really resonated was Hannah from Civicus talked about how some of the folks they really need to be able to train are people who don't think of themselves as data people. So you use the word data and they run away, even though they're exactly the kind of people we need to work with. And so they have worked on specific language and designing workshops that integrate data, but aren't like data first kind of workshops. I thought that was a really useful lesson that probably most of us could gain from. And then we also just talked about some of the resources that we've used and the kind of workshops that we provide. You know, School of Data, MIT Media Lab, a book called Building Evaluation Capacity. So I think there's just a range of resources. I know I personally am going to be combing through here and looking at more, how I can adapt my own training a little more based on some of these. There's just so many helpful resources.
That's great, and really super good points. I think that thing about like, I mean, data, how much of a mystery is around data, and when we use those terms, how we turn people off, and so maybe it's often helpful not to do that. So, good point. Anything else from Sarah's group, Hannah or Steve?
No, I think she's summed it up quite nicely, and there's some additional stuff in the Google Doc. So, no.
Well, that's good to hear. Let's go, Marilyn. You got a pair with Thong. I'm gonna not say the name properly, Thong. So apologies, but go ahead, Marilyn.
Hi, it's Twong.
Thank you, Twong. I really appreciate that. Any ahas from your conversation?
We talked about, I guess, mainly what our activities were in terms of. So Marilyn offers, I think, maybe she'll talk better about it. Actually, I'll let her explain.
So my experience is really mostly observation in the field, working with Doctors Without Borders as a consultant for some form of data literacy for logisticians. Brought me to Malawi, and I just briefly explained that I saw some field work that was very that reminded me of what Dick was talking about in transferring things to something that was non-technical. I saw people mapping in dirt to show escape routes for cholera epidemic, where the churches were, where the sources of food were, having that translated high-tech into paper, and then having that high-tech paper translated again into something digitalized to help people. So it was having a field observation understanding of some of the challenges, and doing a lot of interviewing, which I'm not sure that I'm at liberty to share fully, because I am not a member of Doctors Without Borders, but it was a very interesting learning. And what I'm offering right now, and that's what Tom and I talked about, was that I'm working with a number of software companies, presently with one called Neptune in Norway. And these companies are looking to do CSR projects, corporate social responsibility. So they would love to be able to assist with GIS mapping. They feel it's their corporate duty and their civic duty to help humanitarian companies by donating services. And we're talking about that briefly.
Great, that's super good and super rich, Marilyn. Thank you so much. And we'd love to actually hear more about your efforts with those software companies as they go along. So please do keep us up to date here at the Data Literacy Consortium with that stuff. That's great. Let's go, Anna and Eva. Can you, either one of you, tell us a little bit about your conversation, any key takeaways?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I apologise for the lack of camera. It's a laptop. I'm not just hiding. So we were, again, talking generally about what we've been working on. We also had Lara in the group, who I think has possibly had to drop off now.
I'm still here.
Oh, you're still here. I've got a camera now. I think some of what Lara was saying was particularly useful. So she's been working with HDX. They've developed a data periodic table. So we are going to be interested to see that. Lara, like me, is kind of in the stages of designing data literacy framework, or training in my case, so that we can kind of bring it out to wider organisations within our, or wider teams within our organisations. Interesting that does seem to be a big buy-in from senior team members sort of in the organisation. It's becoming much easier to get people involved at senior level involved in data, because they are more aware of how much about and the importance of it, whilst not quite getting the nuances of it yet, I think. So I think there's something in educating them as well.
Yeah.
I have found, and again, I'll mention it in the notes further in the resources, but there's a data literacy advocates group in LinkedIn, and they did a webinar, kind of a remote workshop thing recently about various trainings or tools they've found useful, games that they've used in training. So it could be something worth looking at. And
Great.
Eva, was there anything you wanted to add in?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think a common perception we've had is, the challenge of targeting, because there are so many different levels and interests in data and different perceptions around data. And so it's also something I've struggled with, is trying to build kind of a holistic framework, but then also having it be relevant to so many different actors in the data space within doing humanitarian work. So how do we pull out those profiles and really make sure to them that this is relevant to you?
I think that I want to add to Eva's work, because I think it's been really important, because we're thinking about data literacy in the Red Cross Red Crescent as what does the organization need, then what does the operations need. So for example, if they're doing emergency response or preparedness, they might need a different kind of data skill set versus what needs to happen in the office. And then you have the 4 or 5 generations of people in your workplace who may or may not have varying kind of data skills, from data curious to data ready. And so it becomes super complicated, and we're trying to different mechanisms to do that, but we're also looking at frameworks and measurement, and Eva's been quite mute in her success in trying to look at that for us, and I'm really thankful.
Great. So we have one last group, last but not least, Bob, Lisa, and Kate. First of all, apologies, Lisa and Bob, I realized that I'd thrown you two together after the groups were well into play. So apologies on that, but Kate, just curious in terms of what takeaways you had in your discussion with those fine 2 people.
I made everyone listen to my conversations about fish, like I usually do, Dirk, as you know.
Yes.
And it was incredibly helpful, because I think we were able to talk a little bit about repurposing materials and some of the gaps in materials. And we're just sort of trying to get into a little bit of how could we make the material sharing better, like, I don't know, kind of a wiki database with tags, so that when you're searching for things, you don't have to go to 20 websites. You can see, like, this one has data flow mapping, or this one uses papers, or, like, I'm wondering what would be, if we wanted to make a data set of data literacy materials, like, how could we do it in a more findable way for when you're looking for something to repurpose? You don't have to look through everybody's playbook. So that was one of the takeaways we sort of ended on. And then I really want to appreciate Lisa and Bob sharing their insights and experiences with me as I try to think about helping fishers understand what it means to get data about their work.
And so, sorry, one thing that you didn't mention is the podcast. Tell us more.
Oh, yeah, no, we did talk about that. So I work with fishing communities and getting them to feel like they own their data and are stewards of their own data that is then used to regulate and manage them is a really big challenge. So we did some initial scoping, and we decided that podcasts might be the best way to reach them, because they're very hard to get together in one place. They're remote. A lot of them have low text stuff, but they all spend 2 to 3 hours getting from the dock to where they're going fishing, so they have time on their hands. So we thought, what could we do about data literacy in a podcast? So I'm working on scripts for those now, and I will definitely share those, because who else wants to listen to a podcast about fish data than hopefully fishermen and the people on this call?
Yeah, I think you're a little bit of a trailblazer there, because radio is the top way to reach audiences in terms of communication across humanitarian response. And so when I saw a podcast for data literacy, my heart kind of went pitter patter, because that's how we might be able to reach different things. So anyway, well done.
Yeah, I'll let you know how it goes. We can make more.
Well, and great on that, folks. We have 1 minute left for this hour, so we need to wrap this up. Heather, you want to talk about our list and how to continue this conversation?
Yeah, so I think I'm really glad that you're talking about how do we aggregate and share content. I also feel like this network is a way for us to pilot things and to get feedback, because we're basically people in the know who have some experience. So this week I shared a little bit around our data for volunteering stuff, and I hope that other people feel comfortable to use this trusted network. We're not all going to publish it everywhere, but just count on each other, and you've met each other in the groups. But if you have something you want to pilot or test before sending it out, please feel free to use our mailing list. Ad done. Over to Dirk.
Oh, but just just to say, the address is share@dataconsortium.net. That is in the Google Doc. Please make note of it and use it and as much as you can. Caitlin, you want to tell us about our next Data Consortium check-in meeting?
Yeah, so we were just talking as you were all in breakouts about when we could do the next meeting. We are noticing that a lot of face-to-face meetings are getting canceled. So we thought we'd take advantage of that. So we're going to try to do our next meeting earlier than we would normally have, and that will probably be at the beginning of May. So we'll work out the time zone, and exact date. But if you have something that you'd like to share on that call or a topic that you'd like us to address, please feel free to ping the list or ping us individually, and we will try to get that onto the agenda. But yeah, ideas welcome.
Yes, ideas are very much welcome. Thank you so much, Caitlin. And with that, it is 4:01, top of the hour. Just to note, we are going to be taking all the notes that you took and trying to create a blog post to represent all that happened on this meeting. The recording will also be made available shortly. And with that, I need to end with just some thanks. Firstly, to Lisa, Caitlin at Center for Humanitarian Data. It is great working on these with you. Heather at IFRC, you are the rock from which we are all moving forward, and so grateful for your presence. And the rest of you that have come today, Bob, of course, also for sharing your stuff at the beginning of the hour. But everyone else here, we are just so grateful for you, for your attendance, the fact that you came to this call, the fact that you consider yourself a data literacy practitioner and you are willing to share both in terms of what is working for you, but also perhaps your failures as well. So thank you so much. Please do, as we said, use the list, share it, dataconsortium.net, ping us, and also please come to the next call because we would love to see you again. And with that, I will say thank you, and that's the end of this call. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thanks, everybody. And also our next podcast will be called Fishing for Data Literacy. Our next call, Fishing for Data Literacy. I am so proud of that.
Oh, no, I think Kate ran off already. But anyways, good. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.